I challenged myself to read popular fantasy romance novels, and I ended up liking the genre. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Now for today's video, I'm doing a wrap up of all the fantasy romance novels that I managed to finish this entire week. So last week I challenged myself to read only popular indie romances. Now this week I'm challenging myself to read indie fantasy romance novels. One of them isn't indie romance published, but we're gonna let it slide because it is my video. But I'm reading the most popular fantasy romance novels that are now trending either on booktok, or they're talked about a lot on booktube, or they're climbing the Amazon charts. If you guys are new here, you guys wouldn't know, but I don't really read fantasy romance novels that much because I have a very hard time finding a specific kind of fantasy romance novels that I like. And the last fantasy romance series that I read was actually from Laura Thalassa, called the Four Horsemen series, and after I finished reading Death, which is the last book in the quartet, I tried to read some popular fantasy romance titles and it just didn't really fulfill the need that I had. But this video features some of the best books that has made me into a fantasy romance reader. So the first book that I want to talk about is this one called The Dragon's Bride by Katee Robert. And now Katee Robert is a author that I kind of have a love-hate relationship with. Sometimes her indie romance novels don't really hit the mark for me in my personal opinion, but my friends really enjoy them. But I really enjoyed her series that's ongoing right now, where it's like a mythology retelling, and the first book is called Neon Gods. I really liked Neon Gods, and then I read Electric Idol, which is book number 2. I also really liked Electric Idol, and I'm going to talk about Wicked Beauty later on in this video, but needless to say, sometimes Katee Robert hits the mark for me and sometimes she misses. So I decided to pick up her monster romance that a lot of my friends have read and that is starting to climb up the ranks on Amazon, and it has over 7,000 ratings on Goodreads. Now this one features a world that's merged together with humans, and our human female character decides to travel into the solid world of monsters and creatures because she is running away from a very abusive relationship, and she decides to take this deal that the monsters give her, and she is kind of auctioned off as someone who could be a wife. And our hero is described to be kind of like a lizard man, and he buys her because he's absolutely captivated by her, and they just have this kind of like arranged marriage. In no way, shape, or form did he ever force himself on her. It was a very kind of like natural relationship where they were getting to know each other before they made any moves. Now, overall, I thought that the storyline in the beginning was very interesting, but then towards like the middle, it was a little bit slow. And then towards the end, it quickly turned into a very sickly sweet romance that I ended up really enjoying. So I ended up giving this book a 4 out of 5 stars, and I am eagerly anticipating for book number 2 and book number 3. Okay, so the next book that I picked up is part of the series that's trending on booktok, and it's called the Plated Prisoner series. First book in the series is called Gild by Raven Kennedy, and Gild is essentially a retelling of the myth Midas. So if we all know or familiar with who Midas is, Midas can touch anything and it turns into gold. So we are brought into the story of how Midas is ruling over these kingdoms. Each kingdom has a separate ruler, but he is thirsty for power. He's thirsty for ownership of land, and he's known as like the Almighty, and everybody is scared of him because of the power that he wields with his magical touch. And there are people in the book that are used as kind of for pleasure, and our heroine is the most sought after because she is literally glistening in gold. Her skin is in a tone that is like a gold color, and she is dubbed as Midas's favorite, and that is our main heroine. So our main heroine is completely infatuated with Midas right from the get-go, because we are thrown into the story knowing that they have this strong bond, that they've been together for a very long time, and that no matter who Midas takes to bed, you know, Midas's heart will always be with her. And so the story is just kind of like building around this kingdom in the first book, where we get to know each and every character, and then we start realizing that trouble is quickly on its way. Just because you have one kingdom doesn't mean that other kings and queens are not trying to plot against you to try to steal your land. So a lot of dangerous things happen in this book where our heroine is put into danger. There's also like this traveling scene where she has to move herself away from danger. Things end up happening, people are slaughtered, and she is ultimately kind of just distraught over the whole situation. And the book kind of ends off in an area where we know that now she is separated from Midas and we don't know what's her next step. So this book was absolutely intriguing. I was absorbed into the story. I just loved it so much. I could not put it down. Like, I was listening to audiobook of it and I managed to finish it under one sitting, and then I immediately had to start the second book. So the second book in the series is Glint, and now we know from the first book that she has this whole storyline where she is now separated from Midas and she is trying to get back to Midas. Unfortunately, she is held captive by our other character who has been introduced in the first book, and now he's like very dark, he's gruff, he's mysterious. Just a quick note is that everybody compares this series to ACOTAR, but like to the adult fantasy like version, and I completely agree, because we do have two striking men that we want our heroine to fall in love with, and one of them is the person who's kind of holding her captive and kind of trying to bring her back to Midas for his own personal gain. And this book featured a lot of intimacy between our two characters, the new hero and our heroine. There are a lot of cute scenes in this, and this one reminded me a lot like War from Laura Thalassa, where they had to share a tent, where they had to be in a cot together, where they were bickering back and forth because it's kind of like an enemies to lovers romance, and where she is growing stronger day by day, because even though our new hero is very gruff and he is just a man of few words, except for his quick quips, he wants to see our heroine be stronger because he sees her as just a toy for Midas, and he doesn't like that. He wants his woman strong. So he teaches her to fight and to grow stronger mentally and physically, which was like a really nice like character arc for our character. And this book actually ended off in a really, really big cliffhanger. That it was like a cliffhanger slash twist that made me shook. Honestly, I feel like smarter people would have probably figured it out, but since I was reading this series not for analyzing for an English paper, I didn't see the twist happening, and I thoroughly really enjoyed it. It literally bumped up my rating by another star, and I ended up giving this one a 4 out of 5 stars, and I was like so eager to read the third book. But the problem is that the third book is significantly longer than the first and the second book, and there's no audiobook for it yet. So I had to read it through ebook on Kindle Unlimited, which is obviously going to be taking a longer time since I'm doing other things like going to work. Like, I don't have time to sit down. So I was kind of in a panic situation. So after that, I decided to pick up another very popular series. This one's from Scarlett St. Clair, and the first book in the series is called A Touch of Darkness. So this is a Hades and Persephone retelling, and this one is actually like a Greek mythology like retelling. Like, our characters are actually gods and goddesses, and basically everybody kind of knows the story of Hades and Persephone. So Persephone gets looped into Hades's business because Hades like put a mark on her, and then now she has to follow him to like the underworld, where she is going to have to be forced to create life, and she has no way of doing that because even though she is a goddess and she's like the goddess of like growing things or whatever, she can't do it. Like, that was like the one thing that she's struggling with. And in the real life, she disguises herself as a journalist when really she's a goddess because she wants to like live a very normal life. And basically this is like the story of Hades doing something that is sending all the gods and goddesses kind of like in a tailspin, because everybody is kind of like chaotic over how he could do something like this. Meanwhile, Hades and Persephone are getting to know each other, and then they're obviously falling in love. Now, this one was extremely boring. Like, I did not want to pick up book number 2. I had book number 2 on from my library, and I did not want to pick it up because of how book number 1 was. It was just so boring because Hades wasn't part of this book for a very long time, and I guess that's why Scarlett St. Clair did a whole spin-off series called the Hades Saga, where she rewrites her books in Hades's perspective because we just don't have Hades in the book. So it literally felt like 50 Shades of Grey spinoff, where Christian Grey is not in the book for a part of the scene because of like this big breakup, and then like we have to read from Grey's perspective to see what he was doing at that time. But like obviously when this series was kicking off, the spinoff wasn't going to happen yet. So I don't really get why people like Hades so much if he's not really in the book. Like sometimes he's in there, but sometimes he's not. It's more about Persephone developing herself and growing stronger as a person, as opposed to like them falling in love most of the time. And it was just, I just couldn't pick up number 2. I tried picking up book number 2. I couldn't do it. So I decided to move on to another book that a lot of my friends were talking about too as well. So this book is called Radiance by Draven. And now this one is like kind of like a Beauty and the Beast retelling. Our hero is a different creature from our heroine. So they obviously look at each other as like, you're so ugly, and then she's like, no, you're so ugly. So I thought that was pretty funny because they have like this arranged marriage, but they both thought that they were both physically unattractive, and they kept making comments about each other about how unattractive they are to each other. And so this book follows these two characters being forced into this marriage and having to find commonalities so that they can make the marriage good. And they chat a lot. They do a little pillow talk. They understand each other's personalities and things like that. And they're really just kind of living life as a married couple in this book. Nothing happens. It's just them running the household. It's just them doing what the normal things that they have to do. It's just their normal routine. And there was like no conflict for a lot of the whole book. And I was waiting for something dramatic to happen. I was waiting for like sword fights. I was waiting for like magic potions. I was waiting for fantasy. I was waiting for everything. Nothing happened. So I'm very confused as to why this book has 48,000 ratings and it's above a 4. And so it was just so boring. And I gave this one a 3 out of 5 stars because I did liked how they were thinking each other were really ugly, and then they slowly started thinking that they were actually really attractive to each other. So the next book that I picked up is this one that I can't say that Breene from In Love and Words was talking about because she recommended me to read The Nightmare. And I didn't want to read The Nightmare because The Nightmare was book number 2 in the series, and I feel like you can read book number 2 before you can read book number 1, but I just wanted to start from the start. So I started reading The Mistwalker. And essentially in this world, it's like the Earth. But what happens is that something ripped in like the space and like the sky and everything. And then all these creatures from a different world are coming to haunt Earth as we know it. And like there's like certain time periods where these creatures can roam the streets, and us humans have tried to live like closely with these creatures by just barricading themselves during the time that they have to roam the streets. And so like they close the windows, close the doors, pull down blinds, pretend that they're not here, they hide in the basements so that these mist creatures cannot float into their houses and ultimately tag them and take them away into their own spiritual world. It was fantastic, the first couple of chapters. I really liked how the world was described. I really liked the fear it instilled in me in chapter 1, chapter 2, because I felt like I was that character trying to close my window, trying to close the blinds, trying to lock the doors. And I was panicking. And obviously our heroine gets tagged by a creature. She's completely outside of herself now. She's just scared as heck because she doesn't even know what she's going to do. She doesn't know if she's going to turn into a creature. She's contaminated. She feels him in her mind. Little does she know, she's going to meet a really handsome man and she's going to be intrigued by him, and then she's going to start growing a relationship with him. But this person is not really a person, because this person is the Mistwalker. It's the character, it's the mist that touched her a couple weeks ago. And now it's him trying to convince her that they are fated mates and that they're destined to be with each other. Now, I can see why everybody would like this book, because it is featuring a hero that is just super soft and who is super in love with our heroine. No matter what she does, he finds no faults in her, and that's very romantic. But also at the same time, this felt like a contemporary romance from like the middle towards the end, because there was just no really magic in it and the world building kind of faded away. So I found it kind of boring because like nothing really was happening, and our heroine was being way too logical with herself, because she was basically telling our hero that there's no way that he can love her because they've only known each other for a few days. So that was kind of frustrating because I kind of wanted insta love. So this one, I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Okay, so the next book that I picked up is this one called A Ruin of Roses by K.F. Breene. And now this one is a kind of like a Beauty and the Beast retelling. And our heroine is poor and she is lurking in the forest, hunting and scavenging for food. And then she realizes that she's being hunted by these creatures because she quickly realizes that her psyche and her body is changing with like what the creature is kind of putting images into her mind with. It's really strange. It's really weird. It took me on a wild ride. This whole book was filled with very, very zany characters, and it was not what I was expecting from the dark cover. It was not what I was expecting from the synopsis. I did not expect really crude humor. Really just like the language used was profanity, and it wasn't what I was expecting from a fantasy romance. And I never knew it was going to be kind of like a romantic comedy versus a very serious fantasy. This one also had a mystery to it, but like because of all these multitude of characters coming in to give their quick quips and their quick lines, I was just distracted by it and I could not care about the mystery itself. And overall, I felt this book was really annoying because the jokes kind of fell flat for me and it was just too much. So this one, I had to give it a 2 out of 5 stars, and I was just very disappointed in this one. Okay, so finally I picked up Gleam by Raven Kennedy because I said enough is enough with reading all these 3-star reads and some 2-star reads. It's time to pick up where we left off with the Plated Prisoner series. Now, Gleam takes place after that whole shocking twist that happened in book number 2. And unfortunately, our heroine is kind of where she is from the start. And she is now feeling that she is trapped in the world that she unfortunately has created for herself. And she doesn't know what she's going to do next. But she knows that she has enemies in her life. She knows that she has no part in it. And she doesn't want to be any part in it. And she wants freedom ultimately. Because now we've seen like the character arc from book number 1 to book number 3. Where she really appreciates her independence. And where she feels that she is a very strong woman who can stand up to a lot of things. There's also a little mind-blown situation that happens with our heroine where she realizes that a beloved character that she really, really loved and she really cherished is still alive. And so she's doing whatever she can to protect this person because she doesn't know where this person is. Unfortunately, they're being held captive and prisoner. So she is trying her best to make herself a good girl so that she can save this person. Now, this is like the whole reason why she is deciding to stay with our villain. And I just didn't believe it because honestly, if I was in that situation, I would say best of luck to you, bestie, to the person who's being held captive. I'm choosing freedom because it's just, there was no motivation behind it, or I didn't believe the motivation behind her character. And I just felt that she was being tortured so much and it just didn't make sense for her to have that strong of a will to save this one person when I didn't even feel like she had that big of a connection with them in the first place. So I felt like she was just really nice. And then obviously like also our romance where the person that she actually picks is blossoming. It's very sweet, but it's also very confusing at the same time because I don't know if he actually likes her, and he's just kind of like a man with a few words. So I don't know if he's going to actually like say anything and declare that, you know, they're together and things like that. So overall, this is the book where in the series I started realizing that there were a lot of things that I just felt that were too weak to be a motivation for our characters. So it made things a little bit more frustrating. It made things a little bit more unbelievable. But then I still really enjoyed the story and I still want to know what happens because now there's like a lot more characters that are coming into play. Kings and queens from different kingdoms are being introduced. They all have their side plots happening. We see their perspectives as well. And, you know, like this really big thing also happened in the end where unfortunately it's also a cliffhanger. I'm still looking forward to continuing this series and I'm looking forward to reading Glow, which is coming out in a couple weeks in June. So next I decided to pick up a series that a lot of my friends are talking about on BookTube, and this one's called The Never King. And The Never King is essentially a retelling of Peter Pan once again, but it's a very dark retelling. So Wendy is not Wendy because she is like an ancestor of Wendy. So our main heroine is actually named Winnie, and basically every female in her family on their 18th birthday, they're taken away by Peter Pan to go to Neverland, and they always return back messed up and crazy. So she's anticipating on her 18th birthday that she's going to be kidnapped by Peter Pan. She's going to go to Neverland and she's going to come back crazy, and she is scared but not scared because she already knows that this was her life ever since her mom kept telling her. Her mom is not a good stable mom anymore after she returned from Neverland. She kind of has like schizophrenia. She's just mentally ill and she can't take care of herself. So all Winnie knows is taking care of her mom. So needless to say, it's a very bad childhood that she was growing up in. So she wasn't really put in like the best conditions. So she has her own issues as well. And she also grew up in poverty. So she has to do a lot of things in order to survive. And unfortunately, like people like sleeping beside her or near her were prostitutes. So she learned from the best on how to survive the social ladder and all these things by using her body. Anyways, so she goes to Neverland. She meets the Lost Boys, and the Lost Boys and Peter Pan are not boys. They're men, okay? They're teenagers. They're adults, and they're very insanely attractive. They never wear shirts, and she is attracted to them. And it's an RH romance. And essentially, Peter Pan lost his shadow and needs to regain it back in order to have his full power so that Neverland has power and energy and magic so that everybody on the island can continue to live. Because once Peter Pan dies, then the whole island dies and everybody dies along with Peter Pan. So it's a very, very important thing for him to go find his shadow. And what happened was that he thinks that Wendy, the very original darling of the family, stole the shadow, and now these generations of girls in the darling family might hold the secrets to where the shadow is. So they have to try to dig through her memory. And so it's like this adventure where we're trying to like figure out where the shadow is. But mostly this book is just all spicy times. Like it's really little plot, guys. Like what I summarized to you is what you'll be reading out of like 3 pages of the whole book. And then like there's a second book. And so it's just mostly her just having a great time. It's spicy times. You get different characters of the Lost Boys. Some are very sweet. Some like it darker, some like it rough, some like it this. Like you get all different flavors. And I can see why people like it, but I just need more plot to make me believe that she actually deeply cares about her characters, because ultimately it's erotica versus romance if there is no like more to it. So I was intrigued of where the shadow was. So I decided to pick up book number 2, which is called The Dark One. Like this title is kind of telling us that it has more involvement with one of our characters of the Lost Boys who is darker than the rest because his whole power and his whole shadow is death. And he just can't control his power because it's just so great all the time. So he traumatizes a lot of people because he can instill fear into you and then make you run away, basically. That's his fun game. So I was expecting a lot more, and I did. I got a little bit more plot. So I got to understand why, like what happened with the shadow, what happened to Tinkerbell, what happened with all these other characters that are being introduced. Hook is introduced, the crocodile is introduced, and then we also have Tinkerbell's like daughter introduced too as well. So more characters plotting against each other, trying to steal land, trying to go against Peter Pan, and Peter Pan trying to ultimately still find his shadow. I just gave up at this point, man. Like the plot was barely there. There was a lot of like spelling and grammatical errors in this one too as well that the editor didn't catch, which was surprising to me, because like this book is like 10,000 ratings on Goodreads. So I would expect Nikki St. Crowe to kind of go back and refresh her like writing. And then I also thought that the plot holes and like just the plot line overall was just too stupid. So overall I gave this one 2 out of 5 stars. But will I read, I think, the last installment to the series? Yes. Okay, so the next book that I read is this one called The Unsealy Prince by Catherine Ann Kingsley. Now, this one, I have to say, I feel like the writing was really good because it was running really smoothly and it was like very like easy to go into the world, but nothing happens in this book. It's like nothing and everything all at once. So basically, our heroine is a human, but she has like witch capabilities because she can cast spells. And then she gets swept away by the Fae. And the Fae is actually our Fae prince. And he needs to marry in order to become the Fae king. But a lot of people want to go against him because they don't want him to rule for some certain reason. And so he's trying to force our heroine into being his queen. But our heroine is very headstrong and she doesn't want to do it. And the Fae king or prince doesn't want to force her to do anything, so he wants her to ultimately submit to him. So he decides to make a challenge for her to go into a maze that he has personally created. I think that was like the first red flag. And if she can escape the maze, she can go back to her freedom and she doesn't have to marry our prince. But the thing is that this whole book is about her kind of just like running through this maze that we know deep down that is like impossible to solve because our prince hero was the one that created it. And because he has his own personal motives, he's not going to make it easy for her. And he's just going to keep changing the maze so that it never opens into freedom. And then inside the maze, there's a lot of monsters and creatures that are out to harm her. And I think that's what saved the book for me because these creatures were terrifying. Like the way that the author was describing these characters, I was like, wanting to throw up because it was just so disgusting and so gross. And I think that's what I wanted. I wanted like the ick factor from my fantasy romance. By the way, I forgot to mention that Gleam from Raven Kennedy, that one had this like very traumatizing bodily harm, like disfigurement scene that made me want to throw up. So that's a quick warning on that one. But back to here in this book, it just wasn't good because our prince felt like he didn't even know what emotions were and he was so confused by our human character. And I guess that's like his character arc in the second and third book, but I just don't want to read the second and third book because this book ran way too slow. I had no idea why he captured her in the first place. And it only was until like the 70% mark where we got introduced to a whole handful of characters that we finally realized why he captured her. So like there was really no purpose to this book for a very long time. There was no motivation for me to keep reading because it was just her running through a maze with creatures that was going to kill her. So I gave this one a 3 out of 5 stars because I really liked those scary creatures in the maze. Okay, so the last book that I'm going to talk about is this one that just released. This one is from Katee Robert. Once again, it's called Wicked Beauty. Now, when I was talking to Lacey about this, I said that I really want to read it because I read Electric Idol and I really like the storyline that Katee is building. I really like the characters, but this one felt like a standalone from the whole entire series because in the beginning of this book, we realized that Ares has passed away and that someone needs to step up to replace him in his role. And because there's so many candidates, they decide to host this kind of gods and goddesses games where they have to like do a lot of like challenges. So think Hunger Games, but for adult fantasy romance. And so our 3 characters, our 2 heroes and our heroine are competing for this ultimate prize. But our 2 male characters are already together in the start of the book and they're already in a really loving relationship. And they decide to both be put in the competition so they have greater the chances of winning the role and that they can rule whatever they need to rule. So what they didn't expect is our heroine to kind of step in there and cause trouble between their very rock solid relationship. One of our heroes is kind of the star of the relationship. He's well loved by everybody. He has great power and people are just attracted to him. Our other hero, on the other hand, is much smaller, you know, in terms of like ability, and nobody really kind of sees him as like this great almighty god. So he feels like he is kind of punching above his weight. And he feels that one day his boyfriend is going to wake up and see who he truly is, which is this very like lowly character, and that he's going to kick him to the side and go fall in love with someone else that is going to be more beautiful, more grand, more whatever. And that just so happens to be our heroine, because our heroine kind of steps in and she's gorgeous, she's loved, you know, everybody wants to be her, everybody wants to be with her. And so there's a lot of insecurities in this like threesome that's happening. And I just did not like this book because I felt that our two male characters were already in love from the start. I didn't believe it. I felt that the hero that had really low self-esteem was getting very frustrating, was getting very annoying. And then I didn't like our cocky character as well. And I thought that our heroine was slick and sly because she was manipulating like these boys. And it just didn't feel like a love. It felt like a game of manipulation. It was just really hard for me to believe in their love and to really grow interest into the story, because I did not care about those games. Those games can leave, because I hate reading books where it's like about challenges and trials, because that was just so the Hunger Games, and I'm over it. Like, I'm over the Hunger Games. So this one was not for me. I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars, but hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Obviously, I really like the Plated Prisoner series from Raven Kennedy, and I highly recommend you to pick up that series if you guys are looking for a dark fantasy romance that is very easy to sink into if you prefer more contemporary romances than fantasy and you want to try more fantasies. Then this is the series for you, and I'll see you guys again in a new one. Bye.